Welcome back to the Whitmercast, a podcast by the John Whitmer Historical Association. We bring you essays, interviews, panel discussions, and broadcasts related to Mormon history and restoration studies. In this episode, we bring you an interview with Shinji Takagi, Meagan Rainock, and Conan Grames, authors of the recent book Unique but Not Different: Latter-day Saints in Japan, published by Greg Kofford Books. We discussed the survey they conducted of Latter-day Saints in Japan and learned more about their findings. You might be surprised by what they have to say. If you'd like to join JWHA or visit our entire backlog of episodes and journals, go to www.jwha.info. With that out of the way, let's get started. Today I'm joined by Shinji Takagi, Conan Grames, and Meagan Rainock to discuss their book, Unique but Not Different: Latter-day Saints in Japan, published by Greg Kofford Books. So thank you all for being with us today. Before we jump into discussing the book, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves? And whoever wants to start first, how about Meagan?
All right. My name is Meagan Rainock. I am a sociologist. I am currently a postdoc at Fisk University, which is a historically Black university in Nashville, Tennessee. And generally, my research focuses on a lot of things, but I kind of got into this just through my connection with Shinji and my interest in sociology and people's experiences more broadly.
I might just add that she was really the driving force in conducting the survey. She's put together the survey, helped a tremendous amount with the questions, and she's our sort of sociology PhD expert that I think walked us through the mechanics of the survey. Not to take anything away from Shinji, who was had the concept and the mastermind, but Meagan deserves a lot of credit for the effectiveness of the survey.
Thank you, Conan. Yeah. I mean, I'm not from Japan. I haven't spent any time in Japan. What I really contributed was the survey, but completely relied on Shinji and Conan in terms of translation, cultural knowledge, those connections with people in Japan, all of that. So it was wonderful to work with
But
both of them.
actually, that was her strength. The fact that she didn't have a lot of connections in Japan made her credible with the people. So people are very free to express their views, with her. And so I think she added to the credibility of the survey.
Mhm. Yeah, we were able to design it where we kept things confidential. People could share openly their feelings, and then took kind of the summarized data and went through the analysis there. But I do think that, yeah, having that connection definitely helped with making sure that people felt comfortable sharing their feelings and also being heard in terms of how they felt about their experiences as Latter-day Saints in Japan.
Maybe
Shinji?
sometimes too comfortable. There were some
Uh,
uh, pretty interesting comments that came out of it.
Well, I mean, just to add, there were like several open-ended questions, like what do you think, or what is your feelings, whatever. I think we have like something like 200 responses, because it's incredible, how people express their views, sometimes in long sentences.
And Shinji, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm an economist, and I guess became an accidental sociologist, by working on this series of projects. Actually, I think I started working with Megan maybe 5, 6 years ago, on another project like this. And I was asked to write a chapter, for a book. And being an economist, I can't write anything unless there are numbers, right? So I decided to do a survey, and I asked Megan to, help me, and so that we could work together. And then we decided that we need somebody who is well connected in Japan. So, we approached Conan, and he was willing to help, and, it was really a collaborative effort. I enjoyed working with them together for maybe like close to 2 years. And the book is the outcome of that effort. I'm sort of semi-retired now, but the 20 years of my life, I was an academic, and the other 20 years, I was an international civil servant, working for an international organization. And my specialty is international economics. And I'm still working on it today.
I was gonna say, it's been really excellent working with Shinji. You talked about like all the graphs and tables in the book, and just the ability to translate those numbers into something very readable. That's all Shinji's like immense expertise in that area. When we first met like 5 or 6 years ago, I was just starting my PhD program, and Shinji had started a divinity degree at Vanderbilt, and we met at church, and we met, and he was like, "Oh, you're a fellow student. I'm also a student. We're co-students together." And I thought that was like really funny because he was someone that had been in academia for so much longer than me, and but yeah, it was definitely really benefited the project to have that kind of experience with thinking through numbers in that way and social theories in that way.
How did you all get started on this project?
Well, what happened was I was asked to write a book chapter, right, on Japan. And I was asked to write, a chapter on contemporary, the church in the LDS church in contemporary Japan. And as I said, I can't write anything unless there are numbers, right? So I told the person who approached me that, I can't write, like a, English literature people, they can write without numbers, right? Well, I'm not a poet. And I said, I need numbers. Otherwise, I can't write. So is it okay to conduct a survey, so that I can write? And, it's up to me, right? And, and at that time, I didn't know what I was getting into, right? Because, to conduct a survey is very, very time consuming, Maybe I knew I had a sense of that, of course, although I had never done that before. And fortunately, Meagan had a lot of experience with this, which immensely helped. And then, Conan's help, he made the survey credible and very comprehensive, because, I think without Conan, I think that the survey would have been like, half the length, probably, right? But he had a lot of curiosity, and we decided to just ask lots of questions, and which is not really the normal way to do it, right? Because the more questions you ask, the chances are that fewer people will respond, right? But the amazing thing about our experience of conducting the survey is that so many people responded, which indicates, that these Japanese Latter-day Saints, are very hungry to share with others because nobody had asked them before. These are just, neglected minorities, right? There has never been an opportunity for them to express their views. And in fact, some of the comments we received said something like, why didn't the church do this, right? why did you do it and not the church, right? As if saying that they've been waiting for somebody to ask them questions.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising, wonderful, but surprising to have so many people complete a survey that probably took them like 20 minutes, where they filled out detailed answers, and then in the anything else you want to share box to say, oh, it was wonderful to participate in this survey. Thank you for asking these questions. We got like a number of kind of open-ended responses like
Well,
that.
just by the way, Meagan is Google translating this thing, right? That's why you knew all these things.
Yeah.
I don't know that we mentioned it yet, but there were over 500 people who, entered the survey. Not and probably close to 500 who completed. I can't remember the total number who started, but close to 500 people completed the.
Well, I think it was closer to 600.
Closer to 600, I think, started the survey. So I think we were all really sort of taken aback at how much interest there was in this sort of survey, and really pleased at the amount of response that we got out of it. It was a very diverse population of people in Japan. They were, by design, all active members of the church. We were looking to try and get a grasp on how active members of the church in Japan had assimilated Christianity and the church doctrine and ways of practice and way of life there, to get a grasp of what it was that made these people be able to accept Christianity and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and stay faithful in it. And so that was the goal, and I think that's why we were so pleased to get such a big response and a broad response. I think there were all kinds of people that chimed in on it. So we were really gratified about that.
Well, Conan, I think you haven't introduced yourself yet.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm a practicing lawyer, and spent actually quite a few years working in Japan. And at the same time, when I turned 19, I served a mission in Japan, became very interested in Japan, and always wanted to go back and do something there. And so after I finished law school, I went back and worked for several years in Japan, and then had the opportunity to actually serve 3 more missions. So my wife and I presided over the Sendai mission, which is in northern Japan, one of the more conservative, remote parts of Japan. And then we went back later and worked with the area presidency in Tokyo, and doing public affairs. Was there during the tsunami, and then we went back and worked directly with the area presidency's office as executive secretaries, which gave me a chance, to be very interested in missionary work in Japan and the members in Japan and how they feel about the church and what made them successful. And Shinji, kind of twisted my arm to join because it was a big project, but I was very interested to see what we could find out that might help. I knew it'd be interesting to anybody who had served in the church in Japan and interested in Japanese sociology and so forth and adopting Christianity. But at the same time, I hoped it might be some kind of a guide and help for leaders of the church in Japan and missionaries in Japan who could try and learn what made it possible for these people to accept the gospel and stay faithful in it. So that was sort of my motivation. So I spent about 20 years, 9 years. Spent 9 years in full-time missionary work in Japan, not really proselytizing work, but working with the church, and then several years as a lawyer in Japan. So that was my background.
Has there been any kind of work like this done before? This is totally new ground you're breaking?
Right, Shinji?
Well, as far as I know, there have been 3 additional people who have done some types of surveys with the Latter-day Saints. And one guy did the written survey coupled with interviews with members of a branch in Japan. just one branch. Okay. And then another person did the survey of, LDS converts in the two branches in the Tohoku area. I think it was Sendai and Yamagata, I think, right? And then there's another person who did sort of a written survey of maybe 50, 100 people, asking them when they joined the church and how old they were, where they were, and things like that, right? So we are not the first, but I think that we are the first one who have done a survey as comprehensive as this, and geographically very diverse, and ask lots of questions.
So throughout your book, you utilize what you call the identity theory as a framework to discuss the trends among Japanese LDS members. Can one of you or whoever wants to share a little bit more about identity theory and kind of explain that to our listeners?
Well, this is the singular contribution of Meagan, right? Because I asked her, how might we approach this thing, and she said, well, let's use this identity theory, right? So I think she is the best qualified to explain.
Yeah, and that came about just through conversations with each other about what Shinji had observed in Japan, kind of different thoughts about the experiences of people in Japan. So identity salience theory is this idea that we hold multiple social identities all the time. So a parent, a sister, a employee, an American, a martial arts artist, right? Like we have these different kinds of identities and expectations associated with those identities. And they can be in like kind of in harmony, or they can conflict with each other. And that's sort of what we're seeing here, or expected to see here, when it came to the experience of being a member of a minority religion in Japan. So the Japanese cultural identity expectations involve things like drinking green tea, having maybe not necessarily like a belief in the Abrahamic religious God, having maybe different expectations of the kinds of things you're supposed to do on Sunday, etc. And the expectations of the LDS religion and faith in a lot of ways seem to really come into conflict. And this idea, this theory kind of argues that we can handle generally some level of conflict between our identities, but when they like really come into major conflict with each other, we have to, or we feel a lot of pressure to give one up. And in that case, that would be, choosing no longer to participate in a religion, or even choosing to be like, you know what, maybe I'm just not Japanese. I am just purely Latter-day Saint, right? Like you're giving up something. So this survey, we designed a lot of the questions to try to get at the kinds of practices and beliefs that people would have. We compared their answers to national data or data that we were able to get from surveys of LDS in the United States to try to get a sense of, what kind of conflict, what level of conflict are people feeling between the expectations of Japanese society and the expectations of religious participation. And for those that continue to be active, how have they minimized that conflict? How have they found a way to create harmony between those identities? Are they doing things like feeling like, no, I can be very Japanese and have reverence for ancestors and all that kind of thing, and that fits in really well with this theology that I'm a part of? Are they doing things like that? Yeah. So that's kind of why we use that theory to try to conceptualize their experiences, and that helped us design a lot of the questions on the survey.
One of the questions I think I always asked myself from early days when I was a proselytizing missionary in Japan is, can you be LDS and Japanese? Is it possible to be Japanese and be LDS? And, there's been this recent series on television, Shogun, which won so many awards, Emmy awards. That was one of the key questions in that, and the Shogun kept saying, well, if you're Japanese, you really can't be Christian. And so that was one of my questions. What will this survey reveal about, can you be a good Latter-day Saint and a Christian? And I was really a little surprised and very pleased at how integrated the members of the church in Japan are with Japanese society. I think they really are both. Now, they may not drink green tea. They've given up a few things in Japanese society that they, wouldn't otherwise do. But I think that the results show and that's why I think Shinji came up with the name, unique, but not different. They were a cross-section of Japanese people, not different than Japanese people, although they had some unique characteristics. So I was really pleased when I found out how well integrated I thought they had adopted both those identities.
Well, I mean, I think there are two things here. One is what Conan has just said, right? That is to say, it is possible to be LDS and Japanese at the same time, right? I mean, it's a proof, right? We have a body of proof, right? But at the same time, the other side is that only those who could manage to do that have remained active in the church, right? So because we are only sampling those who have been able to do it. Right? So I think it's important for us not to lose sight of the fact that there are people who have not been able to do it and subsequently left the church, if not membership, activity in the church. And there are many of them.
Let's talk about conversion for a minute. You bring up this idea of cultural or religious capital in the chapter on conversion. And I was hoping you could tell me more about this. I think it kind of ties into what we've been talking about, but you tell our listeners more about this idea of cultural or religious capital in the conversion process.
Well, I guess I can say something about that. Obviously, the culture, however you want to define it, a culture is an important factor in the conversion process, right? For example, Christianity or Christian church has been more successful in converting people, say, let's say in the Philippines, in Asia, including the LDS church. LDS church has been quite successful in the Philippines. And so much more successful than it is in Japan, for example. Okay. And it's clearly a lot of Filipinos are Catholics to begin with, right? And so, or at least familiar with Catholicism. So that when the Latter-day Saint missionaries go to the Philippines, they find more converts, right? Whereas in Japan, they are less successful, right? So I think just the casual observation like that, suggests that, culture does play a role in the conversion process, right? And I think what we find in our survey is that those who joined the LDS church in Japan, I think number was something like 30%, could have been a little bit higher, have some kind of prior experience with Christianity. Right.
Right.
So, so this sort of confirms prior observation, right? So the sociologists will use the term, cultural capital, because in order to enjoy a religion, you have to have the means with which to reap benefits from it, right? And unless you have the means to do so, you don't enjoy the religion, you don't benefit from that religion, and that means is the capital, right? So the fact that these 30 or 40% of Japanese converts, the fact that they had some prior experience with Christianity means that they have the ability to understand the unique LDS teachings. For example, like we believe in, do not believe in infant baptism or something, right? Now, if you have, some previous experience of Christianity, if you don't have previous experience with Christianity, that means nothing, right? They say we don't believe in infant baptism. So what, right? Or Trinity, for example. If you don't have any concept of Trinity, then when the Latter-day Saint missionaries say, we believe that these are three separate personages, it means something, right? Whether you reject it or accept it, I mean, that's up to the individual, but at least there's they have the ability to make some decision about this particular teaching, right? So that this ability is the cultural capital. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and like Megan was mentioning earlier, the veneration or reverence for ancestors, I guess that would tie in for some folks, the idea of family history work and linking families for, so that would be a connection for them, for that 70% maybe that weren't familiar with Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let me quote from Shinji's writing, because I thought this was very important. That is, for a Japanese person really to adopt Christianity, and specifically Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have to change or be able to adopt a belief in a Judeo-Christian deity. These are kind of religious terms now. So Jason, this is your field here. Belief in a Christian's concepts of sin, atonement, mortality, belief in the Latter-day specific perspective of mortality, salvation, and deity, as well as an understanding of the social and structural organization of the church, abandoning some prior knowledge and worldviews that have been accumulated over years of participating in Japanese society. The most prominent among which may be polytheism, belief that there are many gods, and moral relativism, the idea that there's no absolute good or evil. And on the simple things, giving up tea, drinking, working on Sunday. And then, Jason, as you started to refer, some of the things that we believe that are consistent with Japanese society are humility, honesty, filial and family duties, and reverence for one's ancestors. So that it's a big leap for some people to adopt all of those things. At the same time, there's some things that are very compatible with what we believe.
Yeah, it's like, so that those prior worldviews and ways of thinking about the world and knowledge about how you're supposed to navigate the world is that cultural capital that you've accrued. And it's hard to give all that up. At the same time, it's also hard to gain all that new knowledge. Like that's just like a wave of newness of thinking about the world and your place in it and what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. And yeah, having like some Christian background, some familiarity with the Bible or knowledge of Jesus or participation in a previous church helps to build a little bit of that bridge out to make that switch.
Okay. That's very helpful. I want to talk about some of the findings that you kind of drilled into those near the end of your book. One of the things you talk about, kind of a conundrum, you call it, that you say more than 90% of converts in your sample join the LDS Church before the age of 30, and you say that when the conundrum is when people are more receptive when they're young, but they're also more likely to face opposition.
Well, yeah, I mean, we say that like more than you said 90%, something like 90%, joined the church, had joined the church before the age of 30, but that's an understatement, right? Because I think that the average age was something like 21 or 22. Okay, so it's really when they're teenagers, predominantly when they join or I would say maybe the college years. That's when most Japanese people get converted to the LDS Church during the colleges. Let's say 18 to 22 or something. That's when they have lots of time and they think about their future, think about themselves. They're a little bit away from home. Although not completely independent. That's sort of the critical age, right, when they're most receptive to the church. But as you say, they tend to face a lot of opposition from family. Because I think when we asked the respondents the question, what was the biggest obstacle to your joining the church, right? That was the question, right? I think 30% says something like no opposition, right? That was like a surprising, by itself, right? Because 30%, oh, no opposition. I could just make my own decision and join the church. And the other 30% was family opposition, And the interesting thing is if you select only the subset of the respondents, male above the age of 30, no one, not a single person said they faced family opposition, right? But the women did, most likely from their husband, right? But no male over the age of 30 experienced family opposition. Okay, so this is the conundrum that you talked about, Jason, right? Because the church, if the church wants to increase converts, they should focus on young people. But at the same time, young people have family opposition, so that the question is what to do about it. And I think, maybe Conan, you may have some insights about this.
Yeah, we were very interested in this and a little surprised that of this large group of 500 active members of the church, so 90% of them had joined the church in their teens and 20s. And as Shinji said, the average in that, before 1980, the average age was, of all these people, actually, of all these people surveyed, the average age of conversion was 22. Now, in the last two decades, it's 32. The average age has gone up to 32. So, when I was a missionary, I mean, there's always emphasis. We would like to baptize families. Mom and the dad and the children want to baptize families. And it was so hard to do that, to get the mom and the dad, and as well as the children. And so, as a result, as Shinji said, a lot of those baptisms were college age, 18 through 22, came into the church so much easier. So why has it changed? That's one of the questions we didn't ask, but I think as we've tried to look at it, I think one of the things is that it's a different world today than it was when I was there in the 1960s and we were baptizing a lot of young people, but it was a safer world. And parents, I think, trusted Americans. There were a lot of American missionaries. I think they trusted society. They didn't worry quite as much about their kids. Now we live in a much more, private, concerned world. And so I think it's a lot more difficult today to get parental consent to baptize a young person than it was back in those days. And young people are busier today, no doubt. That they used to, in my day, after school, they used to come over to the church and play ping pong. now they're all cramming to get into college or get into a better high school. So they're certainly busier today than they were back in those days. But I think that the parental concern for their young people has also increased, which has raised this age of conversion.
Yeah, you talk about the young people, and one of the things that I remember from the book is for lack of a better term, these contracts that would be signed. Either the youth would promise to honor their parents and to do good in school and to work hard and keep their nose clean, in order to I guess to take the discussions or be baptized or.
Yeah, that was for me. That was actually one of the most interesting points that came out of this, and we didn't give a lot of detail on that in the book, but traditionally we had a pretty legalistic form. My parent hereby gives consent and will not. We don't say would not sue the church, but got the consent of the parents or for them to join the church. And in this one example, one mission had changed that really legalistic form to a form where the children promise to be good children, study hard, be honest, help their children, honor their ancestors, do all the things that parents would love to have their children do. That's what the children were signing that they would do, and then the parent would sign and a similar, promise that they would support their children in doing these things and have an expectation for them to doing these things. And that has been very successful in Japan, and we really hope that this would be universally adopted. I don't know where it stands today. We haven't really surveyed that since we did that survey. At the time, there was only one of the 7 missions that was doing that. But if you can convince the parents that the church is going to be a good influence on their children to get them to do the things that they expect their children to do in Japanese society, adopt those identities that Meagan's talked about, then the parents are much more willing to sign a consent.
So let's talk about some of the social and political aspects of what you found. Some of the findings that you list that the average self-assessment of those that were surveyed, that they placed their social and political views kind of right in the middle of the ideological spectrum, and that their political views differ little from the general population. You wanted to say anything about that? You say that they tend to be more conservative on contemporary social issues, more in line, I guess, with Latter-day Saints in the U.S. and other places. You want to talk about those findings?
I could say a little bit, and Shinji, feel free to jump in here too. So we asked a lot of questions because, political feelings encompass so many different topics, right? So we asked a general question about, do they consider themselves more conservative or more progressive? And we found that while there was a slight lean towards more, like maybe more moderately conservative, that there was still a significant number of people that identified as progressive. And we asked them about identification with a particular political party. Now, unlike the US, I think it's pretty common in Japan to not have necessarily a political affiliation since they don't have a two-party system like the way that we do. But we find too that there's compared to the general Japanese population, that LDS, Latter-day Saint, Japanese mostly don't identify with a party, but then also identify with a wide variety of political groups. Some of the differences, you're right, there were some differences in terms of some specific social issues as well. And I'm just pulling up.
Same-sex marriage was one of those.
Yeah. Same-sex marriage. Trying to find the specific list here. The same-sex marriage, I think was it support for a female monarch?
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Shinji had, I think, some good insight into some specific questions that would reveal where these people came out on the political issue. Support for a female monarch was one of those. One of those was, do you support modifying the Japanese constitution to allow to have an offensive military capability? If you said yes to that, put you on the conservative side of the spectrum. And if you said no, you're more on the liberal side. And they came out about right in the middle where the Japanese, were coming out. So that was one. The other one was another hot button issue was immigration. Do you support more immigration coming into Japan? And the members of the church were a little more liberal on that. They supported immigration more than the average Japanese person. I think I remember that right, Shinji. Correct me if I'm off on that.
Well, the Japanese Latter-day Saints are about the same as the general population on immigration.
On immigration,
about the same. Now, I think that I think we can summarize this thing, in this way. On political things, okay. First, both on political views and social views, I think an interesting thing we found is that the Japanese members covers the whole spectrum, right? From the conservative to liberal. It's complete, it covers the whole spectrum. So that's the one most important finding. So in other words, Japanese Latter-day Saints are a very diverse group of people. So this is the one finding. Okay, and the second finding is that if we are going to say anything about the difference from the rest of society, on political views, they tend to be very much mirrors the general population. But on social views, they tend to be more conservative, right? Except on immigration, right? That's why I think Conan said they're more liberal. Yeah, they are more liberal on immigration than on other issues, right? But on other issues, they're more conservative than the rest of the population or the average of the population. The interesting thing, we don't mention this thing in the book actually, but I think the only thing we mention in the book is that 15 individuals expressed support for the Japan Communist Party. Okay, the 15 individuals turns out to be 3.4% of the survey respondents. Okay, 33.4%, right? Now, the Japanese opinion survey conducted around the same time states that the support for the share of the population who supported Japanese Communist Party was 3.3%, right? So, so this just shows you, the kind of views, the range of views, political views Japanese members hold cannot be distinguished from the average population. So I think this is amazing. This is amazing finding, in my view, because like in the United States, I don't know about the Community of Christ. I need to know more about that. But at least my understanding is that within the United States, Latter-day Saints tend to be a little bit more conservative, politically, right, than the rest of the population. I don't know, maybe the 60% or 65% or something identify themselves with Republicans. Is that the right number? Something like that, right? But that's not the case in Japan, and you cannot say that, okay, like say if I go to a meeting house in the United States, LDS meeting house, and I meet someone, right? Someone like you, Jason, right? Then, with beard and, I would probably guess that this person is a Republican, right? And I'm more likely to be right than wrong. But in Japan, you have no idea, what the person you're talking to believes politically, because it's just complete mirror image of the Japanese society. This is really amazing. And from my experience, attending church in Japan is that politics are never discussed, you know? So, like in the United States, you talk about the separation of church and state. Well, Japan set the example, you know? We set the example. It's complete separation of church and state. I mean, we do no politics to discuss in the church, which is a good thing.
You're right. So I just looked it up just now. So Pew Research found it's about 70% of among Mormons, which is probably kind of a broader category than just LDS, but lean Republican or are Republican compared to 19% that lean Democrat, which is right, very different, a much more dramatic conservative lean than we see in Japan.
The lot of American things come to Japan, in the church. A lot of American practices, creep into Japanese church. That's inevitable, right? Because leadership, is predominantly American, right? But but these American leaders, when they come to Japan, they're never apolitical. I mean, like for example, like some non-political things can be taken as political, right? For example, like if you preach like a small government, or you say we need to be independent, okay, that sort of implies, sort of a traditional Republican philosophy, right? But you find none of that in Japan, right? So that's why Japanese people feel very free to believe in socialism or even communism, right? There's no inhibition against being extremely liberal, in American political sense, right? So politics play no role in Japanese church. I think in my view, this is one of the greatest findings of this survey.
I want to ask you about a few more findings, just briefly. You found that things that maybe are not that surprising, when you think of U.S. LDS folks, but you say that the Japanese Latter-day Saints tend to have larger families than the general population, tend to marry within the faith. On average, they're more educated. I think the numbers were they twice as likely to be in a professional occupation. Did any of that surprise you at all, or does that just make sense?
Anecdotally, having watched a lot of missionaries in Japan as they go about their work, honestly speaking, it's sometimes easier for a missionary to drag into the church some homeless person off the street because because they have time and they like the attention of the missionaries. And sometimes you will see that the leaders of the church, the branch president or the bishop in that place he's not too happy to see, the people that the missionaries drag into the church, because some of them are just not of the caliber of people that you would hope might join the church, at least if you're not being very Christ-like, let me put it that way. But so when we did the survey, I was a little surprised and very pleased to find out that the members of the church themselves are at a higher professional educational level than the average population, and I don't know if that's because the converts were that way, or that's because over time, having been in the church, which I think really is probably part of the answer, having been in the church, the importance of education and the professionalism has allowed a lot of the members of the church, if they're being in professional careers, has allowed them to have more flexibility to go to church on Sunday than it does if they're, working at the local gas station that's open on Sundays. So it was a really pleasing result for me.
It's also a result that I think highlights some of that conflict mitigation between the expectations of being LDS and the expectations of being Japanese, right? Like pursuing a career where you could go to church on Sundays, or also something that I think is important to bring up is that um, it's a lot easier to be different when you are interacting with people who know you. And it's a lot harder to be different or the odd one out if you're interacting with just the general public and you don't have much chance to get to know each other. So, for example, it's common in Japan to drink green tea, to offer green tea as a gesture of hospitality, and to accept that green tea is sort of like a social greeting, especially like in sales situations or at a car dealership or in business negotiations. And we found that members of the church were less likely to be in those kinds of careers. And I think that's because it's really hard to constantly refuse green tea with people that you're trying to build rapport with, compared to being in a job where you know your coworkers and they know you and they trust you and they know, oh, because of your religious beliefs, you don't drink green tea, and it doesn't mean that you're not respectful of us, right? Like it's easier to mitigate that conflict if you're in a specific kind of career. So finding that pattern also kind of underscored that theory.
In the open-ended comments that we got from members, there was a surprise to me, a surprising number of members of the church who said they really thought that green tea should be taken out of the word of wisdom. And I think that was, one of the reasons is Meagan's pointed out, is because there is a lot of pressure to use green tea. And they said, actually it's healthy. We should take it out of the word of wisdom. So that was kind of a surprising number of people who had that opinion in their comments.
Yeah. Yeah, especially the idea that like green tea is viewed as a healthy drink, and that's different than, I mean, I think green tea is still viewed generally healthy by most Americans, but at least in the South, like we're drinking sweet tea. I don't think that it's like a healthful drink. But but yeah, like that rationality of like, oh well, we don't drink alcohol or we don't, ingest substances. Like the green tea doesn't really fit into that argument, and green tea is something that people in Japan, members in Japan, constantly run into, having to navigate that situation, even if they do, for the most part, avoid that situation by being in a different career or being around family and friends.
Okay, so let me say something about both this career choice and the green tea. I think that in the book we take the view which Meagan has just explained. Right? We view this career choice of being in professional fields as a conflict mitigating choice, right? But I think alternatively we can also view it as an outcome of those who made that particular career choice being able to stay in the church, right? So these are sort of equivalent, observational equivalent, right? But I think from my personal experience, and I'm sure this is true with Conan because we know a lot of Japanese members, because they joined the church when they're still in college, many of them, right? So they're young enough to be able to make career decisions. And they'll tend to avoid those occupations where the conflict is greater. Okay, so that's one thing. And then this conflict, speaking of this conflict, this is my second point, is green tea. Because we asked the respondents question, what was the most important thing, or what are the sort of the decisive factors in making a career decision, right? They say, well, being able to go to church on Sunday, this and that, right? No one said word of wisdom or green tea. No one said. In other words, whether or not you have the conflict with the green tea, for example, is never a consideration for career decisions. Do you know why? Because you cannot eliminate it, right? So this is the point that Meagan was making, right? Among the people of course you can explain, I don't drink tea, right? For the following reasons, right? But you cannot be doing this thing endlessly every day with strangers that you may not see again, So this is the perennial conflict that a lot of the Saints face in Japan, that the church leaders or American members may say, hey, why don't you just explain, right? The problem is you cannot explain. That's the problem, right? And sometimes the choice is not yours to make because it is offered to you, whether you like it or not. They don't ask if you want, right? So I think this is sort of the single most important conflict Japanese members face. It's a green tea when they're acting as anonymous members of society.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you now about some of the beliefs that you talk about in the book. You talk about beliefs that people kind of latched onto first, or thought were most important to them in conversion. You mentioned, the plan of salvation, and then the Joseph Smith story of the restoration, and then the eternal nature of families. What were some of the other things that people said were important to them?
I have a list right in front of me because I thought we might get to this question. So, plan of salvation, that they could choose three things that were important to them, and then we accumulated those and to see which ones came out on top. So, plan of salvation came out of 52% of the people said that was one of their main factors. And Shinji explained that was, we didn't really say what that was, but in general, it's where did I come from? What's the purpose of life? And where am I going in the next life? Then the Joseph Smith story at 33%, families and eternal families at 32%, prayer and personal revelation at 27%, Book of Mormon, I was a little surprised that it was this low, but it's 25%, Jesus Christ and the Atonement at 21%, social activities at 14%, living prophets at 5%. Then there was an other that was actually up around 10% or more that I don't know what those were because those were the only questions that we listed, but that's where they came out.
Okay. Speaking of, Revelation, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was in your findings, you talk about spiritual authority. I thought it was interesting that 73% of the Japanese Latter-day Saints cited a precedence to their priesthood leaders more so than personal revelation as a source of spiritual authority. And of course, it was higher for women. I think 79% to 68% of men said that. Did that surprise you at all?
Well, I think it's important here to to mention that we followed the identical questions asked by John Rees and Benjamin,
Yeah.
so that we could compare our results to the same survey done in the United States. Okay, so we are making a U.S.-Japan comparison here.
Okay.
And then one takeaway is that I guess the Japanese people have this stereotypical characteristics, right, of obedience to authority. Latter-day Saints and the Japanese Latter-day Saints is consistent with this stereotypical view. More Japanese members tend to view, leaders as the source of authority than American members do. So it's sort of consistent with the stereotypical view.
And just to also clarify a little bit, we kind of forced people to pick one or the other. We said,
Okay.
which, if you had to pick, we know that you believe in both personal revelation and believe in priesthood leaders, but if you had to lean more on the side of obeying priesthood leaders, even if it doesn't necessarily, even if you don't know why, versus seeking your own revelation on a matter, even if it's in conflict with priesthood leaders. And yeah, we do see like 73%, like you said, leaned more towards priesthood leaders. And I think for me, seeing the results of the survey, I think highlighted what Shinji says here, but also just in general, I think that in the US, we have this ideal kind of individualism, the idea of, if someone stands up for what they believe in as an individual, everyone will cheer and respect them even more for being the individual. And that's not necessarily like that's a cultural belief in the US that's not shared by other cultures. I think so it it does, like, it's surprising, but it makes sense thinking that another culture could have this idea or this value in, oh, maybe I would defer to priesthood leaders, to the group, rather than following my own beat of my drum kind of orientation on religion.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you happen to know what the about what the numbers look like on the next Mormon survey on that question?
I didn't really put this down on my notes because that's not my area, but it
I just closed the book, so give me a second to find the page.
seemed to me that was about 10% lower for both men and women in the United States than it was 10% lower, meaning they were 10% more likely to rely on their personal revelation than on.
So we compared US men to Japanese men and US women to Japanese women rather than all to all. And generally,
It's on page 81.
yeah, I just found it. Okay. So like Japanese men, it's around like 67%, while US men, it's closer to like 62%. Prefer like would fall on the side of priesthood leaders over personal revelation. And then Japanese women, it's closer to 80% compared to like 69% US women. So still generally the majority leaning towards trusting priesthood leaders versus seeking personal revelation, but more so among Japanese members compared to US members, and also more so among women than among men for both groups.
Okay. So I've kept you about an hour now, and I won't keep you much longer, but I would like to know what should I have asked that I didn't? What were you what's the story that you still want to tell tonight?
You're an excellent interviewer.
One of the things that I think was really amazing that Shinji did was that the comparison we made between the Japanese and the Americans, and on several of those results. And of course, we were interviewing really active members of the church in Japan. I think there was 97% that had taken out temple, had been to the temple. Very active group. The Next Mormon survey was a little more broad survey, but we discovered that on several aspects, the Japanese were really faithful, and I would say as much or maybe even more possibly faithful on things like, if I get this right, help me, Shinji, tithing, word of wisdom, some of these aspects of the gospel that kind of surprised me. They're really a faithful lot of people. Those that have adopted this church Mormon identity in Japan have gone all in with it, and they are really faithful.
Well, but when we compare the American Latter-day Saints with Japanese Latter-day Saints, we selected only those people who said they attend church at least weekly, right? So that we eliminated possible influence of church activity status. Okay, so when we say that Japanese members have greater devotion than American members, we are comparing apple with apple, right? Not because the American members include the more diverse group of people, but at the same time, I must say that those who attend church in Japan are very homogeneous people in terms of their religious commitment. But those who attend church in the United States are more diverse, in their religious commitment. Because this is what we say in the book. We cannot conclude from this that Japanese Latter-day Saints are more faithful than American Latter-day Saints, because like activity rate of Japanese Latter-day Saints is at most 20%. Whereas in the United States, it's more like 40% or 50 or 60 or something like that, depending on the location. So, when you go to church in Japan, you're only meeting, 15, 20% of the Japanese members on record, okay? And they tend to be very, very devotional. Whereas if you go to church in the United States, when you meet, it's 40% of the members on record, right? And 40% of members include all sorts of people, So when we compare the Japanese active Latter-day Saints with American active Latter-day Saints, well, I said apple and apple, but maybe it's apple and orange, It's really difficult to draw a definitive conclusion.
Yeah, I think thanks for correcting me on that, Shinji. I just was really pleased at how faithful and active these active Latter-day Saints were in all aspects of, the difficult things, which you'd say the tithing, word of wisdom, and, church attendance, temple attendance, these things, they're the ones we interviewed are really faithful Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, I guess that the point I'm making is that if we select 10%, top 10% of the American Latter-day Saints, you probably find the same thing, right? They find people like, Conan, right?
Take that as a
Or
compliment.
Meagan. Jason, one more thing. I think you needed to ask us about this women's issue, which is a big issue in the United States, not so much in Japan. So, being an important issue, we did ask, Japanese members what they think of the women's issues in the church. And the amazing thing we found is that among the Japanese women, only two women said the fact that they don't hold the priesthood bothers them. Only two. Isn't that amazing? So Japanese women, especially, more so than men, are so accepting of the status quo for women in the church.
Yeah, but that's also, and we've talked about this before too, and kind of mentioned it in the book. It's also maybe that those women that do really struggle with it, they don't stay because they're also facing greater family opposition than men in staying. And I think it could be hard to additionally stay if you feel at odds with that policy in the LDS Church. Yeah, so there's almost
Yeah, so I guess what the Meagan is saying really is really, the takeaway for us. That is, we did find interesting findings, but they also raise a lot of questions. They raise questions that we cannot answer at this time.
One of the things, if you look at the open-ended comments that they made, there was a certain sort of tendency or trend towards saying, we wish the church were a little less American, a little more Japanese, that they understood us a little bit better, that they would take into consideration a little more, Japanese customs and society. You think I got that correct, Shinji? That's the way I remember it when we went over those.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they were going to leave the church over this. It's just that they felt like, and as Shinji said, the area presidency and a lot of the mission presidents over the years have been Americans. And I think the Japanese feel that maybe we Americans maybe didn't always really understand, the Japanese people and the society and their priorities and feelings as much as they would like to have.
Things like maybe prioritizing like Western holidays in terms of sacrament meeting schedules over like Japanese New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another anecdote, when I was working in a law firm, I had an LDS secretary, and we were heading into the holidays, and I said to her, now look, you are a Christian, and I want to make sure you take Christmas Day off. It was Japan, so Christmas Day was not a holiday. I said, you and I are going to take Christmas Day off, because it's, and I give you that off, and then you can go home on your New Year's as well. I came back to work after Christmas, found out she'd come to work on Christmas Day, and she said, well, New Year's Day was really more important to me than taking Day off. So that's a good example of Meagan.
Yeah.
Another thing we talk about, Jason, is the word acculturation. Acculturation is the process by which, typically like an immigrant, when they come to a new country, they adopt practices and customs and norms of the new host society. That's really the term used in sociology, I think. But we can apply this to a foreign religion too, right? So when a foreign religion, like an immigrant, comes to a foreign country or new host country, which is Japan in this case, if this foreign religion wants to be successful in this new host society, it has to sort of accept certain norms and customs of this society, right? To be successful. But Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, as you know, Jason, I don't know how much you know about LDS Church. I don't know how it's different from the Community of Christ in this respect, but we sort of tend to be very uniform in our messaging throughout the world, right? Because that's we consider to be the strength of the church. The strength, right. We consider this to be the strength of the church, that no matter where you go to Taiwan, the Philippines or South Africa or Kenya or Nigeria, it's the same, right? You worship exactly the same way, you sing the same hymns, you read the same magazine, right? So that's like our pride in some sense, right? Something we sort of hold on to. But in order for native members to accept a foreign religion, he or she must have his or her own acculturation, right? In other words, acculturation has to take place somewhere, either at the institutional level or at the personal level, right? So what the LDS Church is basically saying is that we don't do any institutional acculturation, okay? And acculturation must take place at the individual level. not that no, there should be no acculturation. That's impossible, right? Acculturation must take place somewhere, right? But so we mentioned towards the end of the book that, well, is it really the right model? You know, doesn't the church have to make some, you know, if not a lot, you know, some institutional acculturation to help it grow in a foreign country? I mean, that's an open-ended question. You know, we don't dare to answer this question, but you know, we just leave it as a question for the future.
And it's also like it's not an either or answer either. Like it's a sliding scale. Like when if you go to Chile and you're singing the same hymns, but you're singing them in Spanish. Like there is some acculturation happening along that scale. It's just a very, very minimal scale. So or value on the scale. So it is like it is that open-ended question, one that, we can't answer that with our data, but that is something that is brought up by many of the people in the comments, is just questions about, is it necessary to do, like, to have this particular word be so English centric instead of Japanese centric, or vice versa, right?
So I agree that, you know, some institutional acculturation is inevitable. Right? It's inevitable, right? So that the question is, should it be deliberate or should be left to the natural forces, right? That's really the question, right? And I think my personal view is that it has to be more deliberate, if not entirely deliberate, you know. But
You
given
might
the
enjoy
structure
Community
of
of
the church,
Christ then, Shinji.
well, yeah, but given the structure of the LDS church, no one has that authority except the people at the very top, right? So that even regional authorities, like area presidencies, cannot have that authority, even if an area president sees some need for some adaptation, he cannot make that decision. And then if you go to Salt Lake City, they don't know the local conditions, right? And the people who have local conditions have no authority. And the people who have authority do not know the local conditions, right? That's the problem we have.
Right.
Maybe we should emulate more of a community of Christ in that respect.
Well, we do have very deliberate acculturation.
Yeah, they trust the people more.
When we went through the open-ended comments, in addition to the green tea comment, probably the most common comment was the vocabulary. The vocabulary that we use in the church is we've adopted so many English terms into the Japanese church that for somebody going, for the first time to church, they hear all these terms, they have no idea what they mean, and so like baptism is baptisma, bishop is bishop, the word ministering is ministering. I mean, I can hardly even pronounce it Japanese style, even though, it's an English word. And so that there was a lot of comments on too much English vocabulary in the Japanese church. So that's a hard thing to solve, because you go to the Bible and some of those words that are, you really can't translate some of the words into Japanese. There's no Japanese equivalent to them, but it was one of the things that the Japanese pointed out that was they would like to see change.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of open-ended comments, I mean, I was using Google Translate, honestly, to read the comments myself, since I don't speak any Japanese, but it was absolutely wonderful reading the open-ended comments, because it was almost like a little mini testimony meeting where people just were sharing their deepest, most sincere things that they loved about the church, and also things that that like were very meaningful and personal and things that they cared about, right? So if they're talking about green tea, like it was just so evident, like they're talking about these things that they deeply care about in the context of this church that they get so much meaning from. And I mean, we said this at the beginning, like I'm just so amazed and grateful that so many people participated to that extent in this survey. Like it really was humbling as a researcher to have that kind of strong response. And I think that that does kind of go to that sense of, we really care about this church and like we want to invest in its success as a community. So yeah, it was excellent, I think, to just to participate in it, but also just to be a reader of their thoughts.
That's probably a very good comment to end on.
I was just about to say that, Conan. Any final thoughts anyone has? Feel free to share.
Well, I'd rather end on Meagan's comment than my comment, but I echo what Meagan said about reading these open-ended comments were very touching. And one of the things that touched me the most was, 72%, 71% of the members who entered the survey were converts. And one of the questions was, who had the most influence on you in joining the church? Well, 90%, 89% said it was the missionaries. And that's not surprising because everybody had to take the missionary lessons really to join the church. But when they said, what was it about the missionaries that impacted you? Having been a missionary in Japan and struggled to learn that language, not one of the members said, oh, it was the missionaries were so fluent in Japanese, or it was the lessons that they taught, or that, the words they used. Nobody said that. They said it was the character and the kindness and the gentleness and the loving friendship of the missionaries. I wanted to be like those missionaries. And that was the thing. It was really the character that we would call it the Christ-like attributes. It was the Christ-like attributes of those missionaries that impacted the members the most. And even one of them even said, it was the handshake when the missionaries shook hands with me. That was the thing that impacted them. So that was, as a mission leader myself, that was one of the things that really impressed me. And I hope that the current mission leaders are emphasizing those things. Language is important, but those things, were the most important to the members of the church.
Well, Meagan, you have something else, Meagan?
I was just gonna say it's to like be a sociologist nerd right now. It's like it's those deep relationships that we have with each other that just matter so much and these kinds of things too, right? Like yeah, that Christ-like connection just means so much. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Meagan, Conan, Shinji. I've enjoyed my time with you. I enjoyed the book. I encourage everyone to get Unique but Not Different, Latter-day Saints in Japan from Greg Kofford Books. You'll enjoy it. Thank you again for being with me today.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
We want to thank you for tuning in to the Whitmer Cast. John Whitmer Historical Association is an educational nonprofit institution. For more information, visit www.jwha.info, where you can meet our team and join the association, read past issues of the JWHA Journal, and get updates on upcoming conferences and events. Our theme music is I Love to Tell the Story, composed by Tom Moraine. This podcast is a production of John Whitmer Historical Association, all rights reserved.